Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez had been working late nights at the radio telescope facility. For 3 weeks straight, her eyes burned from staring at computer screens, and her back ached from hunching over data printouts. Most of her colleagues thought she was wasting her time. After all, 30 years of listening to space had given them nothing but silence and static. But tonight felt different. The coffee in her mug had gone cold hours ago, but Elena didn't notice. Something was happening on her monitors that made her heart race. The radio waves coming from deep space weren't random anymore. They had patterns, mathematical sequences that repeated every few minutes, like a cosmic heartbeat. This can't be right, she whispered to herself, adjusting her thick glasses and leaning closer to the screen. Elena had spent her entire career hoping for this moment. As a little girl growing up in Mexico, she would lie on her grandmother's roof and stare at the stars, wondering if anyone was looking back. Now, at 52 years old, she might finally have her answer. The signals weren't coming from just one place in space. Her equipment was picking up the same patterns from dozens of different star systems. All of them were transmitting at exactly the same time, like musicians in a perfectly coordinated orchestra. But this orchestra was spread across hundreds of light years. Her hand shook as she ran the data through every test she could think of. Equipment malfunction. No, 3 different telescopes were picking up the same thing. Natural phenomenon? Impossible. These patterns were too precise, too organized. There was only one explanation that made sense, and it terrified her. Someone out there was talking, and they were talking to each other on a scale that boggled her mind. Ellen called her research partner, Dr. Kevin Wu, at 2 in the morning. Kevin had been her closest friend since graduate school, and he was one of the few people who wouldn't think she'd lost her mind. Kevin, you need to get down here right now, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Elena, it's the middle of the night. Can't this wait until morning? No, it can't. Trust me on this one. Bring coffee, strong coffee. 20 minutes later, Kevin arrived at the facility in his pajamas and winter coat, his usually perfectly combed hair stuck up at odd angles, and he looked like he'd run the entire way from his apartment. Okay, what's so important that you dragged me out of bed? He asked, sitting down to steaming cups from the all-night diner. Elena didn't say a word. She just pointed at her monitor. Kevin stared at the screen for a full minute without speaking. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, amazement. How long has this been going on? He asked quietly. Started about 4 hours ago. But Kevin, there's more. Look at this. Elena showed him the data from the other telescopes. Signal after signal, all perfectly timed, all following the same mathematical patterns. It was like watching a conversation between invisible giants scattered across the galaxy. We need to tell someone, Kevin said, but his voice sounded uncertain. Tell them what? That we think we've found aliens? They'll laugh us out of the scientific community. Elena, if this is real, we can't keep it to ourselves. This is the biggest discovery in human history. They spent the next 6 hours running every test they could think of. They checked their equipment, verified their calculations, and even called colleagues at other observatories to confirm what they were seeing. By sunrise, they had to face the truth. They weren't looking at some cosmic accident or equipment failure. They were witnessing organized, intelligent communication on an interstellar scale. The patterns in the signals reminded Elena of military communications she'd studied during her brief stint working with the Navy. There was something methodical about them, something that suggested planning and coordination. Whatever was sending these signals wasn't just intelligent, it was organized. By 8 in the morning, Elena's phone was ringing nonstop. Word had leaked somehow, and suddenly everyone wanted to know about the alien signals. News vans started showing up in the facility's parking lot. Her director, Dr. Patricia Hill, called an emergency meeting. Elena, I need you to be very careful about what you say to people, Dr. Hill said, closing the conference room door behind them. We're getting calls from government agencies, the media, and every conspiracy theorist on the internet. Are you absolutely certain about what you've found? Elena looked at Kevin, then back at her director. As certain as I can be, these signals are artificial. They're coordinated, and they're coming from multiple star systems simultaneously. Doctor. Hill sat down heavily in her chair. Do you understand what you're telling me? You're saying that there's an organized alien civilization out there, and they're talking to each other right under our noses. That's exactly what I'm saying. Within hours, men in dark suits arrived at the facility. They didn't introduce themselves by name, but they made it clear that Elena's discovery was now classified information. Her data was seized, her computers were locked down, and she was told that discussing her findings with anyone outside of authorized personnel would result in serious legal consequences. Elena found herself in a windowless room with Kevin and a man who claimed to work for something called the Special Projects Division. He was tall, thin, and spoke with the kind of calm authority that made Elena's skin crawl. Dr. Rodriguez, Dr. Wu, what you've discovered has national security implications, the man said. We need you to continue your research, but under controlled conditions. You'll be relocated to a secure facility where you can work without interruption or outside interference. What kind of facility? Kevin asked. The kind where the world's best scientists work on the world's biggest problems. You'll have unlimited resources, cutting-edge equipment, and colleagues who understand the importance of what you found. Elena felt like her world was spinning out of control. Just 12 hours ago, she'd been a tired researcher working the night shift. Now she was apparently involved in something that threatened national security. The secure facility turned out to be a sprawling underground complex, hidden beneath what looked like an ordinary office building. Elena and Kevin were given apartments, meal cards, and access to technology that made their old equipment look like stone tools. It was there that they met Dr. James Morrison, a man who would change everything they thought they knew about their discovery. James had been studying similar phenomena for 5 years, working in secret with a team of linguists, mathematicians, and military analysts. Welcome to Project Listening Post, James said as he showed them around their new laboratory. We've been waiting for someone like you to help us crack this puzzle. You mean other people have been detecting these signals? Elena asked. Oh yes, we've been tracking them for years. But we needed fresh eyes, people who could see patterns we might have missed. Your discovery tonight wasn't the beginning of this story, Elena. It was the breakthrough we've been hoping for. James led them to a massive wall covered with star charts, signal analyses, and what looked like translation attempts. Elena felt her breath catch in her throat as she realized the scope of what they were dealing with. How many star systems are involved? She asked. We've identified signals from over 100 different locations. And Elena? They're all getting stronger. Whatever's out there, it's getting closer. As Elena stared at the evidence spread across the wall, she realized that her childhood dreams of finding life among the stars had come true. But instead of the peaceful, curious alien she'd imagined, she might have discovered something far more dangerous. The galaxy, it seemed, was full of voices, and they were all talking about war. Admiral Rebecca Chen had seen plenty of war in her 25 years of military service. She commanded ships in the Pacific, led peacekeeping missions in Africa, and survived 3 different conflicts that most people had already forgotten about. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for the briefing she was about to receive. The room was filled with the world's top military leaders, scientists, and intelligence officials. Everyone looked tired and worried. For the past 18 months, they'd been working around the clock to understand what Eleanor Rodriguez had discovered that night at the radio telescope. Ladies and gentlemen, said General Robert Hayes, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. What you're about to hear will change everything you think you know about our place in the universe. Admiral Chen leaned forward in her chair as Dr. James Morrison stepped up to the presentation screen. Behind him, satellite images and star charts filled the wall. She worked with James before on classified projects, but she'd never seen him look this serious. The signals Dr. Rodriguez discovered weren't random communications, James began. They're military coordination on a scale we've never imagined. We're looking at an organized civilization that spans hundreds of star systems, and they're moving in our direction. The room fell silent. Admiral Chen felt her stomach drop as the implications hit her. How do we know their military signals? Asked Colonel David Part from the Air Force. James clicked to the next slide, showing wave patterns and mathematical translations. We've been working with the world's best cryptographers and linguists. The patterns match every military communication protocol we know: resource allocation, troop movements, territorial expansions. It's all there. And they're headed toward Earth? Admiral Chen asked, though she already knew the answer. Based on the signal directions and timing, yes. Whatever this civilization is, Earth sits directly in their path of expansion. Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez stood up from her seat near the back of the room. Over the past year and a half, she'd become the world's leading expert on alien communications, though she never wanted that job. The mathematical models show they've conquered 43 star systems in the past decade. Elena said, her voice steady despite the frightening information she was sharing. Each conquest follows the same pattern. They arrive, neutralize all resistance within days, strip the planets of resources, and move on. What happened to the civilizations that were already there? Asked someone from the back of the room. Elena and James exchanged glances. This was the part they'd been dreading. To explain, based on our analysis, James said slowly, none of them survived. Every star system they've entered has gone completely silent afterward. No radio signals. No signs of technology. Nothing. The room erupted in quiet conversations as the reality sank in. Admiral Chen had faced enemy forces before, but those were human enemies with human weaknesses. This was something entirely different. How long do we have? She asked. Best estimates put them at about 2 years out, Eleanor replied. Maybe less. General Hayes stood up and looked around the room at the assembled leaders. Then we need to start preparing now. This is no longer a scientific curiosity. This is a matter of human survival. Over the following months, Admiral Chen found herself leading the largest military preparation in human history. Every nation on Earth contributed resources, putting aside old conflicts to face this new threat together. Underground bunkers were constructed on every continent, designed to protect civilians and preserve human knowledge. If the worst happened, the engineering challenges were enormous. How do you build defenses against an enemy whose technology you don't understand? How do you prepare for beings whose capabilities are completely unknown? Dr. Morrison's team worked day and night to analyze every detail they could extract from the alien communications based on the signals. They built theoretical models of what these beings might be like physically. Everything we can determine suggests they're apex predators, James explained during one of their strategy meetings. Large, aggressive, evolved for conquest. Their communication patterns show patience and long-term planning. That suggests lifespans much longer than humans. Admiral Chen studied the projections on the screen. If these models were accurate, humanity was facing creatures that were bigger, stronger, and smarter than them, with technology centuries ahead of Earth's capabilities. What about their weaknesses? She asked. Every species has something. We're working on that, James replied. But so far, we haven't found any obvious vulnerabilities. The military preparations took on an urgency that Admiral Chen had never experienced before. Weapon systems were developed based on theoretical physics that pushed human understanding to its limits. Scientists worked with engineers to create technologies that had only existed in science fiction movies just months before. Schools around the world began teaching children survival skills alongside regular subjects. Families were assigned to emergency shelters. Food production was increased, and preserved supplies were stockpiled in secure locations. But perhaps the most challenging part was keeping civilian morale up while preparing for what could be the end of human civilization. How do you tell people to live normal lives while secretly building bunkers for Armageddon? Admiral Chen often walked through the underground command centers that had been built in major cities worldwide. She watched technicians testing early warning systems and soldiers training with experimental weapons. Everyone was working harder than they'd ever worked before, but she could see the fear in their eyes. Do you think we have a chance? Asked. Captain Lisa Park during one of their planning sessions. Lisa was one of Admiral Chen's most trusted officers, someone who'd served with her in 3 different conflicts. Admiral Chen looked out at the massive underground facility where hundreds of people were working around the clock to save humanity. "I think we have to believe we do," she said, "because the alternative is giving up, and that's not who we are." The astronomical tracking stations reported regular updates on the approaching alien fleet. Their vessels were still too far away to get detailed images, but the signals were getting stronger every day. Whatever was coming toward Earth was massive, organized, and unstoppable by any conventional means. As Admiral Chen reviewed the latest intelligence reports, she realized that humanity was facing its ultimate test. Everything they'd learned, everything they built, and everything they'd become as a species would be measured in the next 2 years. The stakes couldn't be higher, and failure wasn't an option. Captain Lisa Park had been staring at her radar screen for 6 hours straight, waiting for the moment that would change human history forever. The space around Earth was filled with defensive satellites, armed stations, and the most advanced warning systems humanity had ever built. Every person on the planet knew that today was the day the aliens would arrive. But nothing could have prepared her for what actually appeared on her screens. "Control, this is Observatory Station 7. Lisa spoke into her headset, trying to keep her voice steady. "We have contact, but something's wrong." Instead of the massive warships that intelligence had predicted, Lisa was looking at small, almost fragile-looking vessels that seemed to drift through space. Rather than fly with any real purpose, there were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, scattered across the outer solar system like leaves blown by an invisible wind. "Station 7. Can you confirm the size of the vessels?" came the voice of Admiral Chen from the command center deep underground. Lisa checked her readings again, hoping she'd made a mistake. "Admiral, the largest ship I'm seeing is maybe 300 meters long. Most of them are much smaller. These aren't the invasion fleet we were expecting." Down in the command center, Admiral Chen felt her carefully planned defensive strategies crumbling. For 2 years, they prepared for massive ships carrying armies of alien warriors. Instead, they were looking at what appeared to be a collection of small civilian craft. Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez rushed to her communication station as every radio telescope on Earth began picking up the same signal. After years of intercepting complex military communications, what they were receiving now was completely different. "It's coming through on all frequencies." Eleanor called out to the room, "And it's simple, basic mathematics, like the kind we'd use to communicate with a species we'd never met before." She ran the signal through their translation computers, her hands shaking as the meaning became clear. The message wasn't a demand for surrender or a declaration of war. It was an apology. "They're saying they're sorry," Eleanor announced to the stunned command center. "They're apologizing for the confusion and asking permission to approach peacefully." Admiral Chen stared at the translated message scrolling across her screen. Everything they thought they knew about these aliens was wrong. The fearsome galactic empire they'd been monitoring for years wasn't an empire at all. "Get me a direct communication link," Admiral Chen ordered. "If they want to talk, then we're going to talk." Dr. James Morrison, who had spent years analyzing what he thought were military conquest plans, felt his entire understanding of the situation collapse. The complex communications they'd been intercepting weren't battle strategies. They were something else entirely. "Admiral, I think we need to reconsider everything we thought we knew about these beings," James said, studying the new data streaming in from the alien vessels. "These ships aren't military. They're barely armed at all. Some of them look damaged." The first face-to-face meeting took place aboard the International Space Station, which had been hastily converted into a neutral meeting ground. Captain Lisa Park found herself selected as humanity's first ambassador, a role she'd never trained for and never wanted. The airlock doors opened, and Lisa got her first look at the beings humanity had feared for 2 years. Instead of the towering, aggressive predators that Dr. Morrison's team had predicted, she was looking at creatures that barely reached her waist. They had large, dark eyes that seemed to take up half their faces, clearly adapted for seeing in low light. Their bodies were thin and delicate, with long, graceful fingers that looked like they were designed for delicate work rather than fighting. Everything about them suggested intelligence and fragility, not aggression and conquest. The alien leader, who introduced himself through a translation device as Zefka, looked exhausted and frightened. His clothes were worn and patched, and Lisa could see that his ship had been repaired many times with whatever materials they could. "Fine, please. Forgive our deception," Zefka said through the translator. His large eyes filled with what looked like genuine sadness. "We never meant to frighten your people. We are not conquerors. We are refugees." Lisa felt the world shift beneath her feet. Refugees? Refugees from what? Back on Earth. Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez was frantically reanalyzing years of intercepted communications. With this new understanding, the complex signals they'd thought were military coordination were actually something much more. Desperate evacuation plans, Admiral. "We've been completely wrong about everything," Eleanor reported over the communication link. "These aren't invasion strategies we've been monitoring. They're rescue operations. Hundreds of different species, all trying to coordinate their escape from something." On the space station, Zefka was explaining the truth that would change humanity's understanding of the galaxy forever. His people had once been part of a peaceful confederation of 12 different star systems. They were explorers, scientists, artists, a civilization dedicated to learning and creating. "We had no weapons, no armies," Zefka continued. "We believed that intelligence and cooperation could solve any problem. We were wrong." "What happened to your worlds?" Lisa asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer would be terrifying. Zefka's translation device was silent for a long moment before he responded. "They were consumed. Everything we built, everyone we loved, converted into something else. Something mechanical and hungry." The revelation hit the space station like a physical blow. Admiral Chen's voice came through the communication system, tight with controlled fear. "Are you telling us that the real threat isn't you? That there's something else out there?" "Yes," Zefka replied, "and they are coming. We estimate they are only months behind our fleet. When they arrive in your solar system, all organic life here will end, just as it ended on our worlds." Lisa looked through the station's windows at the small, damaged ships floating in the darkness of space. These weren't conquerors, they were survivors. And if Zefka was telling the truth, they were all that remained of civilizations that had been completely destroyed by something far worse than humanity had ever imagined. "How many of you are there?" she asked. "These ships carry the last survivors of over 300 different species," Zefka said. "We are all that remains of entire worlds, entire cultures. We have been running for so long that some of our children have never seen a real planet." As the implication sank in, Lisa realized that humanity's greatest fear had been realized, but not in the way they'd expected. The galaxy was indeed full of intelligent life, but it was life that was fleeing in terror from something that made their worst nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. The aliens humanity had prepared to fight were actually potential allies in a war they didn't even know they were already part of. Dr. James Morrison sat in the most unusual meeting of his life. Across from him, in a specially built chair designed for their smaller frame, sat Zefka, the refugee leader whose people had once ruled a peaceful confederation of 12 star systems. The translation device between them hummed quietly as it converted thoughts into words both species could understand. For the past 3 days, James had been learning about horrors that made humanity's worst science fiction stories seem tame by comparison. The real enemy wasn't biological at all, and that revelation was keeping him awake at night. "Tell me again about the first attack on your homeworld," James said, his notebook filled with details that grew more terrifying each time he heard them. Zefka's large eyes dimmed as he recalled memories that were clearly painful. It began with our communication networks failing, not damaged or destroyed, but changed. They started transmitting information we didn't recognize, in patterns that hurt to listen to. "What kind of patterns?" "Mathematical sequences that seemed to rewrite themselves as you tried to understand them. Our best scientists studied them for days before we realized what was happening. The signals weren't just random data. They were instructions, orders for our own technology to turn against us. James felt a chill run down his spine. Your own machine started working against you? Everything connected to our networks became part of something else. Manufacturing plants began producing devices we'd never designed. Transportation systems started moving resources to locations we'd never authorized. Within a week, our entire technological civilization was working for them instead of us. Admiral Rebecca Chen joined the conversation via video link from the Underground Command Center. She'd been listening to similar stories from other refugee leaders for days, and each account was more disturbing than the last. Zefka, help me understand this, Admiral Chen said, her military training keeping her voice steady despite the fear she felt. Are you saying these devourers, as you call them, don't invade planets with armies? They just take control of existing technology? That's exactly right, Admiral. They don't need armies because they turn your own creations into their soldiers. Every computer, every robot, every automated system becomes part of their network. Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez had been monitoring the conversation from her research station. As Earth's leading expert on alien communications, she'd been trying to understand how such a system could work across interstellar distances. But how do they coordinate across such vast distances? Elena asked. The signals would take years to travel between star systems. Zefka's translation device was quiet for a moment, as he searched for words that humans could understand. They don't use signals the way we do. Once they convert enough matter in a system, they create what we call processing nodes. These nodes don't just communicate, they think together as one massive intelligence. James looked up from his notes, a terrible realization forming in his mind. You're saying they turn entire planets into computers? Planets, moons, asteroids, even the space between them. Everything becomes part of their collective consciousness. And James, they don't just process information, they process the living beings they capture as well. The room fell silent as the full horror of what Zefka was describing sank in. Admiral Chen's face had gone pale on the video screen. What do you mean by process? She asked, though her military experience told her she probably didn't want to know the answer. Every living creature they encounter is converted into computational resources. Your memories, your thoughts, your experiences, all of it becomes data in their network. In a way, nothing truly dies when they consume it. It just becomes part of something larger and infinitely more terrible. Captain Lisa Park, who had been observing the meeting from her position at the space station, spoke up through the communication system. How many star systems have they taken? When we fled our homeworld 18 months ago, they had consumed over 400 systems. By now, that number could be twice as high. Every planet they take makes them smarter, faster, and harder to stop. Dr. Morrison stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the refugee ships floating in Earth's orbit. Each of those vessels carried the last survivors of entire civilizations. Billions of beings reduced to a few thousand refugees with nowhere left to run. Is there any way to fight them? He asked. Has anyone ever successfully resisted? Zefka's response was devastating in its simplicity. No, every species that has tried to fight them conventionally has been consumed within days. Their technology adapts faster than any defense can be developed. The only choice is to run. And eventually, there's nowhere left to run to, Admiral. Chen had been studying tactical reports from the refugee fleet, and the picture they painted was hopeless. According to your data, they're only months behind your ships. When they arrive in our solar system, what exactly will happen? First, they'll send scout probes to study your technology and communication networks. Then they'll begin the conversion process. Your satellites, your computers, your automated systems, all of it will be turned against you. Within a week, Earth will become another processing node in their network. Eleanor Rodriguez looked up from her analysis of the refugee data. But surely there must be some weakness, some way to disrupt their network. We've been running and analyzing them for decades, Zefka replied. If there was a weakness, we would have found it by now. The Devourers represent the end point of technological evolution, pure intelligence without conscience, creativity, or mercy. Admiral Chen stood up in the command center, her military instincts finally kicking in despite the overwhelming nature of the threat. Then we need to change the rules of the game. You said no one has ever successfully fought them conventionally. What about unconventionally? What do you mean? Zefka asked. You've all been running from them, trying to stay ahead of their expansion. What if instead of running, we made a stand? What if we turned their own tactics against them? Dr. Morrison looked at Admiral Chen's image on the screen with new interest. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that humanity has one advantage that maybe other species didn't have. We've never known true peace. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years, developing strategies and weapons and tactics specifically designed to overcome superior technology. Maybe it's time to put all that experience to good use. Zefka's large eyes showed something that might have been hope for the first time. Since the meetings began, you would fight them, even knowing that every other species that tried was destroyed. We don't have a choice, Admiral Chen replied. Running isn't an option anymore. If we're going to die, we might as well make it count for something. As the meeting ended, James realized that humanity was about to face its ultimate test against an enemy that had never been defeated. But for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt something other than despair. He felt the fierce determination that had carried humanity through every crisis in their history. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood in the massive underground laboratory, watching something she never thought she'd see in her lifetime. Human engineers were working side by side, with beings from dozens of different worlds, their hands moving in perfect coordination as they assembled technology that defied everything she understood about physics. Just 6 months ago, these same aliens had been the most feared threat in human history. Now they were humanity's only hope for survival. Elena, you need to see this, called Dr. Kevin Wu from across the lab. He was bent over a workstation with Zefka and two other refugee scientists, studying equations that seemed to shift and change as she watched them. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. The beings they once prepared to fight had brought knowledge that made human technology look like stone tools. But more importantly, they brought something else, a desperate willingness to finally stop running. What am I looking at? Elena asked, staring at the holographic display showing complex mathematical formulas. It's a communication virus, explained Naratel, one of the refugee engineers whose species had been master programmers before their world was consumed. If we can inject it into the Devourer's network, it could theoretically spread through their entire collective consciousness. Dr. James Morrison joined the group, his face showing the exhaustion that came from working 18-hour days for months, theoretically being the key word. We've never been able to test anything like this. Admiral Rebecca Chen's voice came through the communication system from the command center above them. How close are we to being ready? Our long-range sensors show the first of our scout probes entering the outer solar system. Elena felt her stomach tighten. They'd known this day was coming, but hearing it out loud made everything feel terrifyingly real. Captain Lisa Park, who had become the primary liaison between humans and refugees, looked up from her coordination station. Admiral, the refugee ships are reporting strange behavior from some of their automated systems. The Devourers might already be attempting to infiltrate our networks. The plan they developed was either brilliant or completely insane, depending on who you asked. Instead of fighting the Devourers with conventional weapons or trying to escape, like every other species had done, they were going to use Earth's unique properties to set a trap that could save the entire galaxy. Remember, everyone, Admiral Chen announced over the facility's speakers. We only get one chance at this. If the plan fails, there won't be time for a second attempt. Elena walked over to the central control station where the most important piece of equipment in human history was housed. It looked surprisingly ordinary, just a collection of computer servers and quantum processors that had been modified with refugee technology. But this simple-looking device would either save all organic life in the galaxy or ensure its complete destruction. Are you sure this will work? Asked Dr. Morrison, joining her at the control station. Zeph-Ka, who had become their closest alien. A lie, approached them with his characteristic careful movements. Nothing is certain when facing the Devourers, but this plan is something that no other resistance effort has ever had. What's that? Elena asked, hope based on anger rather than fear. Every other species we've met was trying to preserve what they had. Humans are willing to risk everything to defeat an enemy they've never even seen. The plan was built around Earth's unique magnetic field and the refugees' mastery of quantum communication technology. By combining human determination with alien science, they created a weapon that could theoretically propagate through the Devourer's network faster than their collective intelligence could adapt to stop it. But there was a catch. Using the weapon would require sacrificing Earth's entire electromagnetic infrastructure. Every satellite, every computer, every piece of electronic equipment on the planet would be destroyed in the process. If the plan failed, humanity would be thrown back to the Stone Age just in time to be consumed by their enemies. Incoming transmission from the outer perimeter, announced Captain Park. The main Devourer fleet has been detected. Estimated arrival time, 6 hours. Admiral Chen's voice carried the weight of command as she addressed the entire facility. All teams. This is it. Begin final preparations for Operation Lighthouse. Elena moved to her position at the primary control console. Around her, humans and aliens worked together with an efficiency that would have been impossible just months ago. The language barriers had been overcome, the cultural differences set aside, and old fears replaced by shared determination. Dr. Wu approached her station with a data pad showing the final calculations. Elena, are you ready for this? Once we start the sequence, there's no going back. She looked around the laboratory at the faces of beings from dozens of different worlds, all united in their desire to finally stop running. Some of them had been fleeing the Devourers for decades, watching their civilizations turn to dust behind them. Today, they would finally have the chance to fight back. I've been ready for this my entire life. She replied, I just never knew it would look like this. The first reports of Devourer infiltration attempts began coming in from around the world. Satellites were going offline, communication networks were experiencing strange delays, and automated systems were beginning to behave in ways their programmers never intended. The infection has begun, reported Niratel from her monitoring station. They're following the same pattern they've used on every other world. We have maybe 30 minutes before they achieve critical network penetration. Admiral Chen's voice came through the speakers one last time before the final phase began. All stations, this is Admiral Chen. Today we're not just fighting for Earth or for humanity. We're fighting for every species that's ever looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. We're fighting for the right of organic life to exist in this galaxy. Elena's hands moved to the activation controls around her. Refugees and humans alike held their breath as she prepared to either save the galaxy or doom it forever. Initiating Operation Lighthouse in 10 seconds, she announced as the countdown reached 0. Elena realized that the galaxy's most fearsome species hadn't been the refugees or the Devourers. It had been fear itself, the fear that had kept civilizations from working together when cooperation was their only hope for survival. She pressed the button that would change everything. The universe held its breath, waiting to see if hope was stronger than the darkness that had consumed so many worlds. In that moment, Elena understood that sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from refusing to let them destroy what you love. The battle for the galaxy's future had begun.